Welcome back. Before we discuss a lot of stuff about AOP, all the theory around it, let's create a simple project. So I'm choosing Maven project Java 2.0.0 M3 is the latest version that is present right now. I chose it. If there is another version of Spring Boot which is later than this, you can choose that without a problem. So you can do that. And I've entered com in 28 minutes spring.aop as the group ID and Spring AOP as the artifact ID. The dependencies I would choose are, we want to learn AOP. So I would type in AOP and choose AOP. This would bring in two main dependencies, Spring AOP and AspectJ. That's actually the only dependency that we would need. So I'll create generate project. It would download a zip. As usual, unzip the zip to a folder and import it into your Eclipse. Let's import the project in file import existing Maven projects. I've copied my zip file. I've extracted it to 03 Spring AOP in the Spring master class folder. So now I have a pom.xml and you can see that the group ID and the artifact ID matches whatever we have entered. So let's click finish. This would import the project in, delete the old project that I had in here. I don't need it anymore, at least as far as AOP is concerned. So now we have the AOP project set up. If you look at the Maven dependencies that basically expand this, you'd see Spring AOP which is present in here and AspectJ Weaver. So Spring AOP is one of the popular implementations of AOP. This is provided by Spring by default, but it's not as powerful as AspectJ. You can use Spring AOP to intercept any calls to beans. So any beans which are managed by the Spring framework, you can intercept the method calls and do some things around that. However, AspectJ is much more powerful. You can even intercept change of values on a field and things like that. Let's not really worry about that detail right now. We'll look at it a little later as well in detail. Let's focus on getting our first AOP example up and running. AOP stands for Aspect Oriented Programming. Typically, when we talk about applications, you would talk about layers, right? So you have web layer, business layer, data layer. Each layer has its own concern. However, there are things called cross-cutting concerns. One of them is logging, security. These are not things which are related to a specific layer. Let's say I want to track performance across the layers. This is not really a single layer concern. I would want to track performance across all the layers. So this is a cross-cutting concern. AOP is the best approach for implementing cross-cutting concerns. Let's create a simple example for AOP. What we'll do is we'll create two business classes and two DAO classes, which we'll use as examples for rest of this stuff on AOP. So I'll say new class. I would want to call this business 1 and say finish. And this is the business class. So what should it be? At service, right? So business, everything is at service. And I would want to create a corresponding data class, control C, control V. I would want to call this data 1. And in here, this is a data class. So this is kind of a DAO. Actually, let's call it DAO. I'll call this DAO 1. And let's use repository because this is something which talks to the database. So this should have the repository annotation on top of it. Let's create a simple method, public. Let's say it gets some data. Let's just say it returns a string back. So let's say public string get something. For now, let's just return this is DAO1 back. Ideally, when you are naming your DO methods, I prefer calling them retrieve instead of get. Retrieve is something which indicates that I'm trying to retrieve from a database or from an external thing. When I use get to represent something, it might be confused with a getter. So getter setter kind of a stuff. So I would actually prefer to call retrieve something. And let's just say there is a method in here as well. Let's call this public string calculate something. So it would take the data which the DAO retrieves. So it would say before that we need to create an instance of the DAO. So private DAO1 DAO1. We would want to be able to auto-wire it in. Auto-wired, import the auto-wired in. Now calculate something. I would need to say DAO1 dot get retrieve data, retrieve something. And for now, let's just assume I'm returning the same thing back. Ideally, there should be some business logic in here which looks at the data which is returned, does some business logic around that. In this example, we are concerned about AOP and learning things around AOP. So let's not really worry about the business logic which is present in here. And the other thing which I'll do is copy business 1 and business 2 and create business 2, DAO 2. So all that I needed to do was copy this and created business 2 and DAO 2. So here business 2, I would want it to be dependent on DAO 2, and the same thing in here. This should be using DAO 2. So business 2, I've changed it to use DAO 2. DAO 2, what I would want to do is to return DAO 2. That's cool. So we created a couple of business services and a couple of DAO repositories. What we want to do in the next step is intercept calls to this. So whenever the business method is called, we would want to be able to intercept that and print something. Whenever the DAO method is called, we would want to be able to intercept it and print something. Let's look at that in the next step. Until then, bye bye.